This case takes place in Italy and the UK. Jason Peter Marshall was born on the 11th of August 1988 in Greenwich, South London. He was born into a young family plagued with substance addiction. It was a troubled start for him in his early life, and his circumstances only deteriorated from there. At the age of 10, both of his parents were in prison, and Jason suffered as a consequence. He was placed into a children's home in Southend and shuffled among various foster homes. When his mother completed her prison sentence, social services thought it was appropriate to reunite him with her. But she wasn't the best mother, and by 12 years old, Jason began experiencing auditory hallucinations and visual delusions. Sometimes these hallucinations involved angels and aliens. He even believed himself to be the embodiment of the Archangel Gabriel. When Jason was a teenager, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a condition characterized by obsessive attention to detail. Not only this, his lack of social skills made it difficult for him to form friendships. As a result, it caused him to retreat further into his own world. Normally, a structured routine helps manage ASD, but Jason had a chaotic life, and this intensified his symptoms of anxiety and depression. On the outside, Jason looked fresh-faced, slim, calm, and quiet. He had chestnut eyes, brown-chopped hair, and flawless skin. However, on the inside, Jason was in profound turmoil. Feeling powerless and no aim in life, Jason despised himself. He saw himself as a nobody, but intriguingly, he recognized the authority and respect that came from someone who wore a uniform. So he took advantage of this. On many occasions, he impersonated members of organizations who wore such uniforms. Jason once claimed that he impersonated an air cadet to steal charity funds. He also dressed as a ticket inspector to hand out bogus fines on the London Underground. Jason even claimed to have infiltrated police stations in Suffolk and Kentish Town to steal radios. He apprehended criminals with a homemade warrant card. It is amazing what a uniform can do. But these were his claims, and it is not clear whether these are delusions or reality. In the year 2008, at the age of 20, Jason tried to take his own life. Because of this, Jason was sectioned under the Mental Health Care Act and was sent to the John Howard Centre. This was a psychiatric unit in East London. He managed to escape from there as it wasn't high security. Following his escape, he committed a series of non-violent crimes, which led to a brief stint in prison. After this, he was monitored by the Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder Service, otherwise known as the DSPD. This meant living a restricted lifestyle under close monitoring. But 2 years later, he escaped the DSPD whilst he was being transferred to a specialist hostel. But of course he was found again and put back into prison, as he was still a threat to society. By early 2012, Jason was released and was left under the supervision of his general practitioner, which in the UK is a doctor. He was able to find temporary accommodation and secured a job as a street cleaner during the London Olympics. Jason found purpose with his new job, and he began living a normal life. However, this glimmer of stability was short-lived. He lost his job. This sent him into a downward spiral of depression and heavy drinking. It was noted that he would consume 8 cans of beer and half a bottle of Jack Daniels daily. Not only this, but he would regularly mix his drinks with his medication. This was particularly bad, and apparently caused him episodes of memory loss. At this very low point, Jason was searching for meaning, identity, and belonging. In doing so, he became a male escort and regularly hired himself out. Struggling financially and dealing with severe personal issues, Jason Marshall created an alter ego for himself. This allowed him to shield himself from his past trauma. Jason took to various gay dating apps such as Grindr, Badoo, and Adult Work under the name Gabriel. This is where he met many of his clients and would charge £400 an hour. His services were distinctly niche. He focused on S&M, bondage, and roleplay scenarios. Jason had a specific preference for smaller, older men, ideally of Italian descent. In his roleplay sessions, Jason was very elaborate and liked to dress as an MI5 agent, wearing a homemade uniform to enhance the fantasy. He assumed the persona of an authority figure who would arrest his clients on fabricated charges. These encounters were structured as intense interrogation sessions where he would strip his clients and bind them to a bed. His aim was to completely dominate his clients. He would push his clients to a point where they would plead for forgiveness, blending fear with thrill. This created a potent but dangerous experience. The critical event that eventually brought Jason Marshall to public attention occurred one Sunday evening. This was where he met 58-year-old Peter Fulli through the dating app Badoo. Peter was an IT technician of Italian descent. Peter had a quiet and somewhat solitary life. He lived in a small 2-bedroomed semi-detached bungalow in London. His home was just 1 story high and barely 25 feet wide. Its exterior featured a window spanning the width of the house. He had a mud strip of lawn dotted with potted plants and a bird feeder, as Peter loved birds. The bungalow seemed almost an afterthought at the end of a row of terraced houses, never quite fitting in with its surroundings. This was just like Peter. Peter was a homosexual man who was unmarried and very introverted. Despite living in his community for a number of years, Peter maintained a low profile. Only a few neighbours knew him by name. His inside living space reflected his professional and personal life. The interior was packed with technology. He had numerous webcams, hard drives, monitors, and computers all crammed into one side of the house. This space served as his workspace and a means to socialize. A simple 2-seated sofa faced the bank of screens. Behind this was a cramped box room just big enough to fit in a double mattress. Sadly, this house is the setting where Peter met his end. Peter's family lived in the north of England and had nothing but admiration for him. During an interview, his younger sister Anne stated that he was a great laugh. She said he was always joking around with a dry sense of humour. He had a real cheekiness and it always lit up the room. There was not a bad word that could have been said about him. Peter was caring and thoughtful. He would give a stranger his last penny. On the flip side to this, Peter found socializing beyond family challenging. He was small, shy, and somewhat overweight. This made face-to-face interactions for him quite difficult. Though he loved computers and IT, he had few other hobbies. Not leaving the house much, he had limited opportunities to make new friends. Additionally, he had a heart condition that sometimes caused breathlessness. This caused him to be reclusive. His only relief when breathlessness kicked in was his oxygen tank next to his bed. With that being said, the anonymity of the internet provided Peter with a platform where he felt more comfortable engaging with others. He had much more confidence than he ever could in person. This digital realm allowed him to openly discuss his desires and fantasies. He could openly seek love or casual sexual encounters. This is the reality for many people, not just Peter. It is an unfortunate position to be in and leaves a person vulnerable. Through these online interactions, Peter met various individuals. One man that he would eventually cross paths with was Jason Marshall. In December of 2012, Peter was using the dating app Badoo and stumbled upon Jason's profile. On Jason's profile, it mentioned that he had a taste for older, shorter Italian men who were on the quiet side. The two matched and began talking. Their connection was initially digital, and Peter thought Jason was a safe man, safe enough to invite him around to his house. As they messaged, they both came to an arrangement. The arrangement seemed promising and exciting to Peter. They agreed to meet for a consensual encounter at Peter's home on the evening of the 6th of January 2013. The intentions were that they both wanted to explore each other's fetishes and mutual interests in bondage. No strings attached. On the 6th of January 2013, Jason took the Central Line from Stratford to Northolt. He was dressed in what was assumed to be an MI5 attire under a jacket. This included a black woolen hat, a waist-length jacket, blue jeans, and a black backpack. Jason arrived at around 7 p.m. and was greeted by Peter. The initial interaction was awkward but polite, very typical of two introverts meeting for the first time. Introductions were exchanged with a mix of nervous jokes about meeting in person. Peter appeared comfortable with Jason, who presented himself well. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere was set with soft lighting and gentle music. Jason then revealed his homemade MI5 uniform, which was far from authentic. The outfit was made up with makeshift items, like a black lanyard attached to a fake ID that read Jason Marshall, British Secret Intelligence. He had a utility belt with latex gloves, plastic handcuffs, a toy gun, a pretend can of pepper spray, and an old Nokia mobile phone rigged to look like a secret radio device. A little after 7:30 p.m, the small talk had finished. Jason declared to Peter that he was under arrest for espionage and hacking a government laptop. Towering over Peter, Jason commanded him to strip completely naked, and Peter did. Jason then instructed Peter to lie face down on the bed. The thrill of fear was part of the excitement for Peter, but the situation escalated beyond his control. Jason pulled out heavy-duty adhesive tape from his backpack. He then proceeded to bind Peter's wrists and ankles tightly. He then placed a strip across Peter's mouth. Helpless and immobile, Peter was at the mercy of his captor. As Peter lay on the bed, Jason went through his neatly folded clothing and retrieved his wallet. Next, Jason began to demand Peter for the PIN for his bank card. When Peter hesitated, Jason escalated the intimidation. Jason pressed a hunting knife against his cheek. It was now abundantly clear. The situation had moved from a consensual roleplay into real terror. Peter endured increasing brutality as he refused to comply with the demand for his PIN number. Jason was still lost in his delusion of espionage and interrogation, to the extent that Jason administered an injection into Peter and he called it truth serum. The substance was actually haloperidol, which is an antipsychotic with no truth-inducing properties. Through the ordeal, Peter's screams were muffled by tape and drowned out by classical music. All the while, Peter's pet Budgie squawked with panic, a truly harrowing scene. Jason then sadistically burned Peter with a cigarette. The torture continued, and Peter's pain and fear escalated as the night dragged on. By the time midnight approached, Peter was exhausted and gasping for breath due to his heart condition. He did not have access to his oxygen and had no choice but to relent and give up the PIN. It was either this or die. Jason then briefly left the house, withdrawing £780 from Peter's account at a nearby Shell garage. He made some purchases and then went straight back to Peter's house. He returned after midnight and the situation grew even more grim. Peter pleaded for his life as John decided to eliminate his witness. John began the end by suffocating Peter. He did this by tightly wrapping cling film around his head. He sealed it over his head, and then his face, and then over his nose. Jason was trying to ensure that no air could reach him. Despite being hogtied and suffocated, Peter's fight did not end there. Peter Fulli fought desperately for his life, struggling against his bonds. Jason then attempted to suffocate him with a plastic bag. The struggle caused them to fall off the bed, landing behind the sofa with a heavy thud. All that remained was the sound of rustling of plastic and Peter's muffled pleads for air. Jason stood calmly and, in an utterly sinister move, delivered a mock benediction in Latin. He said, "In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti," which means, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. He then said, "Ego sum resurrectio et vita," meaning, "I am the resurrection and the life." By this point, Peter was dangerously unconscious and his lungs were filling up with carbon dioxide. Peter had lived a solitary life, and his last interaction seeking connection was to end with tragedy. As Peter appeared to be dead, Jason then staged the scene to resemble a burglary. He rifled through drawers, overturned shelves, and ransacked cupboards. But curiously, he took nothing of value, not even Peter's tech gadgets or his gold watch on his wrist. To further confuse any investigations, he flushed several unidentified items down the toilet. He also pulled out as many wires as he could from Peter's array of computers, silencing the music and cutting off the LED lights. With the room now quiet, Jason lit another cigarette and methodically gathered his belongings. He then began to spread a flammable liquid around the room, focusing on the bed, walls, and sofa, and most intensively all over Peter's immobile body. With a flick of his lighter, flames began to consume the room, quickly filling it with thick black smoke. At precisely 12:41 AM, Jason left the bungalow. He was confident that he had destroyed all evidence of his presence. To obscure his involvement, Jason sent a message to Peter via Badoo. At precisely 9:33 AM the following morning, Jason wrote, "Sorry I didn't turn up last night, felt sick. Would you like to meet soon? From Gabriel." A few hours later, he followed up with, "Are you there?" and then continued to send more messages, such as, "Don't ignore me, I said I was sorry," and "Stop being mean." Jason received no response, so he finally sent, "Fine, be like that," after which their communication ended. Peter's death was a calculated murder for a few £100, leading to an initial investigation that disastrously failed in the capture of his killer, allowing Jason, the Badoo killer, to continue his lethal spree. The reason why this case can be looked into with great detail is the same reason why Jason would eventually be caught for his crime. When Jason was unplugging wires frantically, he missed one of Peter's webcams. The whole torture and the whole murder was caught on camera. But before this evidence came to light, Peter kept his freedom for a little while longer. On Tuesday, the 8th of January 2013, just 30 hours after the murder, Jason used Peter's bank card to purchase a flight to Rome. The transaction went unnoticed, as the card had not been reported stolen. Also, the purchase amount was small, and there was no active monitoring of Peter's bank account. By Friday, the 11th of January, at 6:50 AM, Jason was on a flight departing from Gatwick Airport to Rome. He then lived off the funds he had stolen from Peter, and revelled in a carefree existence. For a short time, Jason enjoyed his new lifestyle funded by his crime. But then, the money soon ran out. Jason used the dating app Badoo, but not for social connection, but as a hunting ground for vulnerable and lonely men. He didn't have to search the streets for potential victims. The app provided all the details he needed. User profiles often included age, size, living situation, and sexual preferences. This was all the information that Jason needed to select targets who were older, lived alone, and had submissive tendencies that matched his sadistic desires. On the 26th of January, 20 days after Peter's murder, Jason met 67-year-old Vincenzo. Vincenzo was a retired tour guide and a divorced father who was well known in his community. Jason was still using the alias Gabriel, and he found his next victim through the same deceptive tactics. The tactics that led to Peter's tragic end. At 7 PM, their meeting unfolded like a typical first date between strangers. Jason introduced himself awkwardly. After some polite exchanges, Jason was invited inside, a story that sounds all too familiar. The two men engaged in conversation, and Jason soon revealed his MI5 costume, claiming that he was on an assignment from the British Embassy. Again, his outfit was complete with a homemade ID, plastic handcuffs, and a toy gun on his utility belt. But this time, the ensemble also included real items, like a hunting knife, a truncheon, and real pepper spray. Jason took on the role of the MI5 agent once more. Jason declared Vincenzo under arrest for being a spy. Vincenzo played along, stripping and allowing himself to be gagged and hogtied. Again, what started as consensual roleplay soon began to escalate drastically. Jason demanded, "I want your PIN number." Jason then escalated the violence as he burned Vincenzo with a cigarette. As Vincenzo continued to fight his demands, he struck him with the truncheon. Now Vincenzo was battered and burned, but he still maintained his strength. But then, Jason blinded him with pepper spray until Vincenzo couldn't breathe. Vincenzo finally relented. With the pin obtained, Jason left and quickly withdrew €400 from a nearby cash machine. To make the scene appear like a burglary, Jason trashed the home, but oddly did not simulate an actual break-in. He stole a debit card, laptop, hard drive, electronic gate key, and Vincenzo's car. This time, Jason decided against using cling film or fire as methods of killing and destroying evidence. Instead, Jason opted for a more direct method. He strangled Vincenzo with an electric flex cord. This was a long and arduous procedure, intensifying the pressure until Vincenzo was unconscious. Not totally satisfied, Jason then stabbed him multiple times with his hunting knife in the chest. As Jason stood over Vincenzo's lifeless body, he recited the last rites in Latin. With no immediate threat forcing his departure, unlike last time, Jason left the scene calmly and as quietly as he had arrived. Unfortunately, it would take over a week until Vincenzo's body was found, by which time Jason had long fled the scene. Once his newly acquired finances were spent, Jason became motivated once more. He was ready again to seek, rob, and murder. Set in his sights this time was an Italian man named Umberto Gismondi. Umberto was a solitary Italian man with a taste for S&M bondage and roleplay. He too agreed to meet a stranger he had flirted with online. The man introduced himself as Gabriel, though he was really Jason Marshall, the Badoo killer. On Thursday, the 21st of February 2013 at 7 p.m, Umberto welcomed him into his home. Just like the previous two times, the evening's atmosphere was lit by soft lighting and music. But this time, Jason's movements were being carefully observed by the police from a surveillance van. They were tracking Jason's movements, having linked him to the previous crime through chat logs on Badoo. The police had also tracked withdrawals Jason made with Vincenzo's stolen debit cards, and were aware of the stolen car. The officers watched as the two men engaged in polite conversation. Jason and Umberto shared a meal and watched television, but the expected violent criminal activity did not unfold. The police operation seemed fruitless, and by the end of their shift, the encounter remained non-violent. The surveillance team left, believing the night would continue to be uneventful. However, inside the apartment, the situation deteriorated. Jason's patience began to wear thin as he became frustrated by Umberto's reluctance to engage in the more extreme activities. When Umberto laughed off Jason's claims of being an MI5 agent and mocked his costume, Jason snapped. What followed was a brutal attack. Umberto was beaten, kicked, pepper-sprayed, and battered with a truncheon. Amidst the violence, Jason demanded Umberto's PIN number. Just like Jason's last two victims, Umberto would not easily give up his PIN number, but as the beatings continued and escalated, he eventually relented. These beatings left Umberto seriously injured, but still alive. Jason then stole an iPad and €400 from Umberto's account, but as he was preparing to leave, Umberto's gag came loose. He began to scream for help, attracting the attention of neighbours, who then alerted the police. The neighbours rushed to help, and the police quickly came back to the scene. Umberto provided the police with the name of his attacker, Jason. The police quickly tracked Jason using the GPS from his phone. He was tracked to a bus heading south in the suburbs of Rome. Shortly after, Jason was arrested at 3:30 a.m. He was subsequently charged with attempted murder and murder. On the 9th of July 2014, Jason was on trial for the murder and attempted murder. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. With this sentence, there was a stipulation that at least 3 years of those 16 years must be spent in psychiatric care. With the Badoo killer now imprisoned, the case was officially closed. For now. After Jason's arrest and conviction in Italy, attention turned back to the United Kingdom. There was some newly uncovered evidence regarding the murder of Peter. The evidence was the webcam footage which captured the torture and murder of Peter. This footage was found by Peter's nephew, Christopher. Christopher was the first person to watch the footage. This chilling footage documented the entire murder and was a pivotal moment that changed the course of the investigation. Before this, Peter's death was ruled as an accidental fire, but now there was undeniable proof that this was a murder. Armed with this new evidence, the UK authorities initiated proceedings to have Jason extradited from Italy to face charges related to Peter's murder. The process of extradition involves legal and diplomatic efforts to return individuals accused or convicted of crimes to the jurisdiction where those crimes were committed to stand trial or to serve a sentence. In Jason's case, this process was facilitated by the clear evidence linking him to Peter's murder. The UK and Italian law enforcement officials were very cooperative, and Jason was sent back to the UK. Upon his extradition back to the UK, Jason was formally charged with the murder of Peter. His trial in the United Kingdom brought to light the horrifying details of Peter's last moments, as captured on the webcam footage. Prosecutors presented this footage to the jury. They also presented other evidence, including Jason's use of Peter's bank cards after his death, and the flight to Italy. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution built a very compelling case against him. Jason's defense in the UK included claims of amnesia, and he attempted to downplay his responsibility for his actions. The defense also referenced his mental health issues. However, the overwhelming evidence against him, particularly the webcam footage, made it difficult for the defense to counter the prosecution's case. In the end, Jason Marshall was found guilty of the murder of Peter. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 39 years. This was a sentence that reflected the severity of his crime and the calculated cruelty with which he had executed it. The judge overseeing the case described it as sadistic. The judge said, "You tortured him for so long because you enjoyed it so much. I'm sure that you feel no remorse whatsoever for what you have done." A parole board will determine if Jason is suitable for parole when the time comes. It is entirely possible that he will never be released, but this case can be seen as a cautionary tale for those who seek company online.